Alright, so I tried to make this video yesterday several times and could not keep my thoughts straight, so we're gonna try again. I'll be talking about sex and sexuality today. So, as you can imagine, in my very conservative religious community that I grew up in, marriage is thought to be a sacred covenant between a man and a woman, which invites a lot of homophobia, among other things. So, being gay or LGBTQ is definitely seen as a sin growing up. And the first time that I remember this really coming up at school, I was in the cafeteria in elementary school, and I heard the joke or saying or whatever you want to call it that God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And honestly, at the time, I was like, oh yeah, haha, that's funny, that's such a good point. We should put that on a t-shirt. And an older girl at the table, she was like a couple years older than me, she spoke up and she was like, you shouldn't put that on a t-shirt, that could offend some people. And I heard her and I was like, oh, she's probably right, that probably could offend some people. So that was kind of like my one and done encounter with joking about it or like actively discriminating against LGBTQ was that moment, because I felt very called out and I felt bad and I didn't want to offend people. So growing up, a lot of other people though were still talking bad about them, making jokes, just making a lot of really discriminatory and homophobic comments a lot. And I even in high school, my math teacher in class, in a room full of his students, went on a tangent about how he wouldn't want a gay man working on his house because he doesn't want that in his foundation. Those were his words. So he built his house. He's often doing a lot of landscaping and construction projects around the house. So, like, that's where he's coming from. Like, if he hired help, he would not want a gay person working for him because he doesn't want that going into the foundation of his house. He also followed it up with, oh, just like I wouldn't want an angry person working on my house because I don't want anger in my foundation. There's a lot to unpack there. For one, not how that works. For two, you don't know what people are doing in their life. If that's how it works, you've already got a multitude of sins in your foundation because you don't know what people are doing. And for three, that's just blatantly homophobic. So I didn't even really know how to unpack that. I didn't know how to deal with that. I think I probably laughed it off and was like, okay, that's his thoughts on it. Moving on. Another time I was not there for this, but I heard that in high school, one of the students came to my school in high school, so he wasn't like born and raised. And he said he was gay, and so it was kind of something that everyone was kind of figuring out. But honestly, like, except for his close friends, everyone else just didn't even want to go there. So they kind of just let it be. But he was feeling ornery one day, I guess, and he went into the home economics classroom and told the home economics teacher, looked her in the eyes, and said, hey, I'm gay. And this woman cried. From what I hear, this woman cried. Real tears. So that probably happened, I believe it. There was also an instance on Facebook. I don't know what the original post was, but my high school basketball teacher commented that if we're okay with homosexuality, like eventually we'll be okay with pedophiles, eventually we'll be okay with bestiality, like where does this end? And the one word answer is consent. Like, pedophiles and bestiality are not okay because children and animals can't consent to sex. Two adults can, just regardless of their gender. And I just didn't even feel like getting in the argument, honestly. I didn't even say anything. I'm like, because consent, you idiot. But I didn't say anything. I was like, I'm just not even gonna go there. Because at a certain point, like, you know you're not changing anyone's mind, and it's not even worth it to try because it just gets into a Facebook argument, which is fun to read, sometimes fun to be in, wasn't feeling it then. So, consent brings me to another interesting point. No, actually, I'm going to stay on LGBTQ for a minute. So, the thing about LGBTQ is that the people in my school who were standing up for that community, they didn't even go as far as arguing that, that, like, it was right or it was okay. They didn't even try to argue that it wasn't a sin. All they tried to argue, or all we tried to argue, was that, okay, maybe that's wrong, but so is talking shit on them, discriminating against them, being hateful towards them. Like, maybe that's wrong, but as Christians, we are called to love everyone, including them, and this is not loving behavior. So that's all we were trying to argue. Like, that's as far as our argument went, and, like, it wasn't enough. Like, people who were being homophobic would argue against us and be like, no, like, it's totally fine to talk smack on them, it's totally fine to not associate with them, and kind of like with any other sex sin, I guess, if it was someone you knew, like, one of your friends ends up being gay, they always made sure to have the talk, I still love you, I just don't agree with your lifestyle. Which is not, like, that's not acceptance. That doesn't feel nice. You're not like, oh my gosh, thank you for loving me and hating how I act day to day. Like, that's, no. So that's pretty much, like, the tone of how LGBTQ was talked about, dealt with, whatever. So back on the point of consent. So this leads into, like, a general sexuality conversation. Consent is not something that was talked about a lot. As you can imagine, our sex education was, these are the terrible STIs you can get from it, and be abstinent until marriage. All abstinence, all day long. That's what they taught, abstinence. And so that, for one, kicks out the conversation of consent. You know, it's just not talked about a lot. And for two, it kicks out the conversation of everything that can happen between kissing and vaginal penetration. And that is a big window. Like, there's a lot that can happen in between. And so I know people who, like, are leading really good Christian lives, and they're definitely sexually active, but they haven't done penetration, so they're fine. It's not a sin. And, I mean, I really don't agree with that. In the view of in the light of abstinence beliefs. So there's a whole lot of education that we're missing out of, and, like, we're basically taught that sex before marriage is a terrible, awful sin, sex after marriage is totally fine, and there's no discussion of being, like, emotionally ready or physically ready or mentally ready, which is a huge part of that. My first relationship, I didn't kiss a boy until the day I graduated from high school. I was very much on the abstinence train, didn't want to get anywhere near sex until after I was married at the time. And the relationship I was in, like, it was fine until I was like, okay, like, we're cool, I'm ready for my first kiss, whatever. And then he would just take it, like, further and further and further, and places that I was not comfortable with. So I'm continually being pushed past my boundary. And, I mean, part of it is because I'm, like, mortified that I keep sinning and keep getting pressured into this sin, but also because, like, I'm a late bloomer with sexuality. Like, I was just not ready for that. I didn't want that yet. I didn't want to explore that side of life. And so I'm continually getting pushed past my comfort zone on a semi-daily basis by this person that I'm supposed to be able to really trust and supposed to love and who's supposed to love me. And, like, I would tell him, like, I don't want to do this. But in my mind, like, he didn't want to do it either, but it's like, men just can't control themselves, which is also bullshit. But that's just kind of how it's viewed. Like, it's not his fault, he just can't control himself when sexuality kicks in. So after that relationship ended, I was a sophomore in college, and I swear to you, I could not think of, like, I had no positive outlook on romance or sexuality, none. Like, I wanted nothing to do with it. Like, brought up a lot of anxiety, and I couldn't figure out how anyone thought that the pros outweighed the cons. And I was like that for a good couple of years before I could, like, comfortably date again. And I didn't even try to get into a long-term relationship again. My next long-term relationship was after I graduated college, and I was at a place where I was finally like, I think I want to explore my sexuality. I think I want to be sexual. And that's when a relationship was able to work for me, because I wasn't scared of that, and I wasn't constantly worrying about that and worrying about being pushed past my boundaries. And I found someone that I could trust, you know? It wasn't like, this is probably TMI, but a lot of men, like, I'd push their hand away from an area and they try again several times in the same encounter, I guess. The guy that I'm dating now, like, I trusted him so fast because I would move his hand and he would not try again until the next day. And, like, that's so respectful. If a girl moves your hand, that's saying no, so don't try it again. She already said no. But that's a different topic. So, yeah, that's kind of, that's my spiel on LGBTQ and sexuality and how it fucked me up for a little bit in the community that I was raised in.